Good evening. This is our sixth lecture of literary texts. We are going to speak about, today about elements of fiction, again, continuing what we did last time. Elements of fiction are what we study in order to analyze a text of a short story or a novel. Last time we did the plot and the conflicts. In the story Evelyn, we saw how the plot started and how it all concentrated on Evelyn's conflict, whether to leave her home or not to leave her home, and all the arguments that she has been putting in order to decide to go this way or that way, culminating with the scene when she remembers the mother, and she remembers both the promise and the fact that the mother gave all her life and died young and crazy and overworked. And at this point, a decision is made. And then after the climax, where we expect some sort of resolution, the resolution actually does not take place because going to the K, she decides against what she has decided for, that is leaving, and we are not this time given reasons, and we are not given a logical argument like what has been given to us through the story, where she is giving us her thoughts and her arguments for what to do and what not to do. Here, Joyce decides to give us the new decision, or the decision against going only in images, which brings us to the next element of fiction, which is imagery. Like we did in poetry, imagery is can be divided into both sensory images and figures of speech or comparisons, and these are used to give meaning to the events of the story. They are not just used for their own sake or for the beauty of an image. And the two images that end the story here are the image of Evelyn as being drowned, feeling that Frank is taking her into all the seas of the world and is drowning her, that he is not saving her by taking her on this boat, but that he is drowning her, he's killing her. And we don't have any logical argument for that image or that feeling. It is just a feeling that going on that boat is drowning into seas that she does not know. The other image that ends the story is the image of Evelyn as a helpless animal. When Frank starts talking to her, asking her to come, trying to push her into the boat, she stands stubborn and stops being a human being capable of interacting with Frank, and she only can give him this pale face that seems to understand nothing and that acts like a helpless animal. Now, if we analyze both images, we can get some sort of meaning. But of course, when meaning is only coming through images, it can be interpreted differently. One reader can read the images of the sea of trouble as a sea of all the future that we does not know, that we do not know. Somebody else can see in the helpless animal a creature that is acting upon instinct, and so she is instinctively choosing to stay in her country. Somehow there is something instinctive in staying in Ireland, in a place that you are tied to, even though it does not give you happiness, it does not give you a good chance of living, but there is something that instinctively ties the inhabitants of this place to it and prevents them from moving somewhere else. But also a helpless animal could be could stand for somebody who does not know what to do, who does not have the courage to take a decision that human beings take logically. So the image can be read differently. The seas that she will be drowned in could be interpreted by one reader as standing for the fear of the future, the unjustified fear of the future, while for some others it could be the fact that she has always felt perhaps that Frank was not true to her and did not wanted her only just as her father was treating her mother, and that once she leaves and becomes his wife, living with him in his house, she will not be anything else but like her mother, the thing that she did not want. So you can read it differently. Some critics read not just Evelyn, but the whole of the stories of the short story collection of Joyce, Dubliners, as saying that living in Dublin gives people a sense of paralysis, shalal. It's only that they live in this place and they stop being able to think or to act or to move. And this is what happens to Evelyn at the end of the story. It's this characteristic of all Dubliners who end up in a state of paralysis, not knowing what to do or how to move or what they want to do. So these two images decide for us how we're going to read the ending of the story. And because they are images, we as readers can differ in reading the ending of the story. The question, why did Evelyn decide not to leave at the end, is really could be answered up to each reader and on how he or she interprets these two images that occur at the end of the story. So imagery is definitely one of the important elements of fiction, and it is used, as I said, in connection to the events of the story and the characters in the story, and they are not just images for description or for the beauty of the image. We can then move to another element of fiction, which is setting. When we speak about setting, we are speaking about all the details of time and place in the story. If we read the definition here, the setting is the physical and social context in which the action of a story occurs. The major elements of setting are the time, the place, and the social environment that frames the character. Setting can be used to evoke a mood or atmosphere that will prepare the reader for what is to come. So, thinking about setting, you have to try to follow all the descriptions of places, all descriptions or details that give some sort of the social environment, the streets, the dress, what people wear, what people eat. All these are details of setting, and also time. How is time arranged in the story? We're going to do place on its own and time in its own. Before we start trying to see time and place in Evelyn, I would like you to remember that in writing a work of fiction, there is something very different from relating a story to a friend. If I'm walking down the streets and I'm going to describe to you what I saw, I will just describe everything I see. But in a story, a writer would choose details for a reason. When he speaks about a certain window or a street or the fields or whatever he's speaking about, he is trying to tell you something about the characters, about the events, or about the environment he wants you to know. So details of place, especially in a short story where a writer does not have space enough to speak and put details, will always be significant. Let's try to figure out the places that are dealt with in Evelyn and why they are significant. If you've read the story even for one time, you know that there are two main places in the story: Evelyn's home and the quay where the boat is. These two places are very different from each other, of course, one closed, one open air, and we have even Evelyn acting very differently in the two places. But the description of each place tells us something about the story and about Evelyn. If we start with place, we can notice the description of the neighborhood. This is how the story starts, describing the neighborhood. We can also think of the house itself, the social class, religion, domestic details. All these give us the details of the place and can make us add meaning to our reading of the story. This is the opening paragraph of the story. She sat at the window watching the evening invade the avenue. Her head was leaned against the window curtains, and in her nostrils was the odor of dusty cretonne. Now, the underlined sentence is part of the setting we're speaking about. That is the place she is in and the details of the place. And here we have the details of the curtains, the cretonne curtains that are full of dust. Cretonne is not a very expensive material, and so we can immediately from the first paragraph guess the social class we are speaking about. And then it's also dusty, probably meaning that people there do not take very good care of the cleanliness of the house. She starts looking from the window, and there is more description of the place outside. One time there used to be a field there in which they used to play every evening with other people's children. Then a man from Belfast bought the field and built houses in it. Not like the little brown houses, but bright brick houses with shining roofs. The description again tells us something about the neighborhood. It is a poor neighborhood, little brown houses, and it used to have a field next to it, but it is now taken by somebody who's richer, and he is building houses for richer people. So this poor neighborhood is being even marginalized and put into just a corner of the place. The children of the avenue used to play together in that field, the Devons, the Waters, the Duns, little Keogh the cripple, she and her brothers and sisters. So it's like they are being surrounded in that place. It used to be an open field and is not anymore. So you feel that somebody is being imprisoned, if you like. From the outside, this is what we can, this is what we get from reading the details of the place. But then we go again into the house to see some more details of the place. She calls it home, and she looked round the room, reviewing all its familiar objects which she had dusted once a week for so many years, wondering where on earth all the dust came from. Here she describes her home and the objects in it as familiar. So we have a description of the house, the place, the home, as something that is familiar. This perhaps we can remember when we see Evelyn's final decision. Perhaps this is why she has finally decided not to leave Ireland. Perhaps she cannot be parted with these familiar objects, or she's not prepared to exist or to live with unfamiliar objects. To her, familiar objects, in spite of the dust and their poverty, are still what she is linked to and tied to. We also get a description, a detail that is very characteristic of the place, Dublin, and of Ireland, which is the fact that you have a photo of a priest. The priest whose yellowing photograph hung on the wall above the broken harmonium beside the colored print of the promises made to blessed Margaret Mary Alacoque, and some promises or prayer. So immediately you can conclude something about the social environment in that place. We are speaking about religious people. This is not necessarily the case if you in every house in London, for example, but in Dublin, in Ireland, people take religion as something that is part of their daily lives, and in every house you're going to have photos, prayers, and so on hung on the wall. So this is again an important part of the setting, and that one has to discuss. Now, these are the settings in which the events take place, but we are also told about other settings that we don't see Evelyn in. She relates to us stories or talks about places that the events do not take place in. Like the theater, when she tells us that she's gone to the opera with Frank, which is a place of fun, introduced only with the introduction of Frank. With the introduction of Frank, also, we have stories about distant countries, the Strait of Magellan, South America, and the future that they're going to have in Buenos Aires if she marries him. And she thinks of these places, these distant places that we don't see any events happening in them, but we see them as the future of Evelyn. And perhaps a bright future, perhaps a future that will never take place. We also listen to another story, a picnic to the Hill of Hoth, that we do not see happening in the story, but Evelyn remembers it, telling us about it when her parents go on a picnic and the father starts trying to make the children laugh, and he wears the bonnet of the mother, etc. We also see in the street, and this is something that we actually that actually takes place while Evelyn is watching from the window. We see an organ player in the street. This also tells us something about the kind of city Dublin is. It's a city where you can have people, musicians, out of work, trying to play some music on the streets for money. So so the first place is the home and the streets surrounding it, and you can conclude about this place that it is definitely not a rich place. It's a poor place. It's not very beautiful. It used to be more beautiful than it was. It is now, the beautiful parts of it are now being taken over by richer buildings, and also it is not a place of happiness for Evelyn. So you can from the description of this place you can conclude something about its significance. It's a poor place where Evelyn is unhappy, and it has all the marks of Irish society, the religious Catholicism and the desire to leave. The other place that is described in this story is the cave where they are supposed to live. And in this place, we can see Evelyn as very tense, although this is supposed to be the place that is going to take her to the heaven she is expecting, that is going to save her, according to all the arguments that she has been giving us all the time. But this place seems very noisy and very crowded, and she feels small there, and she feels at a great danger, and feeling that the only thing that can save her from that place is to hold on the rail, the iron rail, and not to move, to act like an animal instinctively. So the two places are really contradictory, and although the home and Evelyn's house and home are described as dusty, poor, brown, and so on, there is this idea that they are that this house and this place is familiar, is represents a tie that cannot be broken, and something that that Evelyn finds hard to leave, while all the dreams of living respectably and happily in another country, represented by the scene at the quay. The place is actually full of loud voices, too many people, in which we feel that Evelyn actually drowns even before going on to the sea. Her voice does not come out. We cannot hear even her thoughts, which we heard when she was at home, and she looks like somebody who is very small and insignificant in these crowds. So you have two very different places in which the story is set, in order to give us the meaning that the story is trying to give to us. Now, if we move to the other part of setting, which is time, time is constructed in a story by how the author decides to, when the author decides to start the story and then move forward until a certain point. In Evelyn, for example, the events of the story take about 2 hours. The story opens with Evelyn sitting by the window for some time, perhaps half an hour, and then she moves to the harbor, and then there she decides not to leave, and the story ends there. So we are speaking more or less of 2 hours, 3 hours maximum. But in these 2 hours, we learn about all of Evelyn's life and about her deepest thoughts and feelings. So we can think of a short story as choosing a time that is very revealing, a time that is very critical. Joyce has chosen these 2 hours because these 2 hours are going to tell us a lot about Evelyn's life. We meet Evelyn at a critical time in her life where we see all her past, present, and future through her conflict in that critical moment. Now, the 19 years of Evelyn that we know about could have been related differently if I'm relating them chronologically. Chronologically means in the logical arrangement of time. First thing that happens, then the next thing, then the next thing. I will speak about Evelyn being born, and then what happened to her, how she played with the other children, how her mother died, what she had to do after the death of her mother, how she knew Frank and how she fell in love with him, how her father refused this, and then at the end, the fact that she agreed to go with Frank. But the story actually does not present the events in that arrangement or in that order. The story gives us the moment when Evelyn is at a deep conflict within herself, and we know all these events through the conflict and not in the order in which they happen. And usually short stories are constructed around a moment that shows a lot of conflict, and through that conflict we get to know all the other events, and we know them in the relationship to that conflict. So every detail we have been given about Evelyn's life has been actually put in the balance of whether to go or not to go, and it's not just related in for its sake. So all the events, all the details are there only to feed the conflict, if you like. Now, our next element of fiction is the narrator, who is speaking to us. We usually have two ways of narrating a story. Either you have the voice of one of the characters. So, for example, Evelyn could start saying, I, Evelyn, have been working in so and so, and tells us the story of her life. Or you have a narrator, Rawi, who tells us the story and speaks about Evelyn as she, which is what we have in this story. Theme, on the other hand, is the central idea of a story. The theme is the central meaning or dominant idea in a literary work. It provides a unifying point around which the plot, characters, setting, point of view, symbols, and other elements of a work are organized. The theme actually, if we think of all the analysis that we have been doing as somehow taking the text apart, this theme is the element that puts all these together again, all these elements together again. It's the idea behind the literary work. What is this literary work about? What is it trying to tell us? We can think of Evelyn, the short story, as trying to tell us something about the fate of people in Dublin, the connection that people have in the relation to that city that keeps them from moving away from there. Or perhaps you can think of it as something that is not positive at all, as something that these these characters um, as an inability of these characters to move forward. Somehow uh, uh, they are connected to this place in almost a sick way that causes paralysis, as some of the critics say. Um, our final element that we have to speak about is characters. And it is important always when you're reading a short story or a novel or a play to remember that characters, although they are very much like the characters in real life, they are also parts of a text. And a character is not another human being, and it is not to be judged as a human being. A character is only a fictional construct in which the author, through which the author makes some sort of meaning and message through the work. In fiction, character refers to a textual representation of a human being or occasionally another creature. Yes, characters don't have to be human beings. They can be monsters, they can be animals. Most fiction writers agree that character development is the key element in a story creation. And in most pieces of fiction, a close identification with the characters is crucial to understanding the story. The story's protagonist is the central agent in generating its plot, and this individual can embody the story's theme. A protagonist is another word for hero or heroine. It's البطل, the main character. So, and usually the plot is about what happens to the main character. Development of the character is what makes the plot move. What happens to the character? Does this character change? What happens to it at the end? And so on is the main point of the story. Characters can be either round or flat. This is the distinction one critic made uh, about the two kinds of characters in a text, in a fictional text only, short stories and novels. A character can be called a round character. A round character is a character which we know, we as readers know a lot about. We know not just what this character says or does, but we also know its conflicts, its thoughts, and what is happening inside it through the narrator, of course. A flat character is a character that we don't see through, we don't know what is happening inside it, a character that has only one aspect and is there to play a minor role. So characters can be either round or flat. The other thing that determines what a round character, whether a character is round or not, the fact that it changes through the text or does not. So a character that starts as a kind, nice character and plays a small role and keeps this role throughout the story or novel is called a flat character. But a character who has some sort of conflict and is changed by the end of the story or novel is called a round character. The character we see at the beginning is different from what we see at the end. The events of the story or the novel have changed this character. We call this round character. So characters can be either round or flat depending on their level of development and the extent to which they change. Authors achieve characterization with a variety of techniques by using the narrative voice to describe the character, by showing actions of the characters and of those reacting to her, by revealing the thoughts or dialogues of the character, or by showing the thoughts and dialogues of others in relation to the character. Of course, all these things are possible in different ways depending on who is narrating. For example, if I am narrating a story in the first person method of narration using the I can say, I went today to class and I saw the students and I gave a lecture and the students were listening and then they went away or they asked a question and so on. But I cannot say Fulan, Muhammad was sitting and was thinking of so and so, because how am I supposed to know this? But if there is a narrator who is telling the story and he says the teacher came into class, she was not feeling well, the students sat down, Muhammad was thinking of so and so, Fatma looked out of the window and was thinking of this, then we have a narrator who has this power to go into the minds of everyone in the scene. So if I have a narrator in the third person, that is, he's speaking about the characters as she and he and so on, this narrator usually can go into the minds of the different characters. But if I'm speaking in the first person, I have a novel that is written in I, with the pronoun I, first person, then I can only relate my thoughts, but not the thoughts of other characters and not the feelings of other characters. I can relate what they do, what they say, what I can see them doing or hear them saying, but I cannot go into their minds or into their hearts. So using the narrative voice to describe the character, again, I can, in a third person method of narration, the narrator can describe all characters. The narrator can start with saying that Ahmed was an engineer who has worked very hard in order to finish his college years and so on. But or by showing the actions, that is what is happening, by revealing the thoughts or the dialogue. As I said, you can only reveal the thoughts in the first person method of narration of the character that is speaking about the I, and in the third person method of narration you can reveal the thoughts of everybody. So this is what a narrator does. These are the words we should be aware of. Protagonist, antagonist. Antagonist is the opposite of the protagonist, that is, the person, the character, or force in conflict with the protagonist. A round and flat character or characterizations. If we can speak quickly about the characters that we have in the story Evelyn. Evelyn is, we have many flat characters, characters that are there without us knowing any details about them. The mother, for example, the Ernest, the brother, the organ player, all these are flat characters that are not very important. Evelyn and the father and Frank are, Evelyn of course is the most important character, but even the father and Frank are round characters, not just because they change, but because we have different points of view about them. So the father is described as being somebody who was a good father when the mother was around, and then has turned a bit violent and impatient after that. And he is described as a person who is selfish, does not want his daughter to get married because of what he wants for himself. He wants her to stay so that she can take care of him and the children. But perhaps he is also worried about her future if she marries a sailor who would take her away. Frank, on the other hand, is also a complex character because we have at least two views of him. We have him, the kind, manly, nice man who Evelyn falls in love with and enjoys his company and the way he treats her, but at the end she feels something totally different towards him. She feels he is the person who is drowning her, and she does not trust that he is taking her to safety. And also we have the view of the father about Frank, who distrusts Frank and thinks that he is not sincere in his proposal to Evelyn. The character of Evelyn is also a complex character. We see her at the beginning as somebody who is weak, who cannot take a decision, and at the end as somebody who stands strong for the decision that she wants to take. And we can, while speaking about each of these characters, think of the details that are given in the story about each of them. So these are the elements that we have to think about and to trace in each literary text. And next time we will see how we can write about these details that we have traced in order to produce some sort of critical evaluation, either about the imagery, the characters, or the place in a certain text. Thank you.